So here's my question, um, and well, I'll say this: why do you believe in God? But then I kind of have to say, do you believe in God, right? And why don't you believe in God? Why do you believe in God? What is it that that draws you to God? Um, for many of us, we just grew up going to Sunday school or went to church, and we kind of morphed into this relationship with God, and it's enough for many of us, right? We experience God in that, and we see God in our everyday. It's kind of this relationship that grew, but also for many of us, the questions that we have now don't get answered by what we experienced in Sunday school. And we kind of have this perception that all you need to have is faith in faith. Just have faith. And in a world that is around us, that isn't really a good enough answer. And you may be here today, or you may know of somebody here today who has walked this Christian life and has come to this point where they go, it just doesn't make sense. And maybe you're at this point where you've considered leaving. Deconstruction is a term that gets used a lot, that will often, it's a term for asking questions and not having the answers for, or at least asking really tough questions and not having the answers in what you learned in Sunday school to satisfy your quest. And maybe that's you. Maybe you've come up against tough times and you're questioning, is there a God? Or is Jesus God? Is Christianity the right way? When we grew up in Sunday school, some of us, we sing the song, Jesus loves me, this I know. Why? For the Bible tells me so, right? And sometimes our faith has been as simple as that. Somebody told me that the Bible tells me that Jesus loves me. And that's as deep as our faith has gone, right? And there isn't a lot of answers for today's tough questions for the Bible tells me so. In fact, a lot of us don't even understand what the Bible is. And there are concepts that the Bible is just a whole bunch of people coming together to collaborate to come up with a story, right? There's, remember the Da Vinci Code, different movies that have been out that have been challenging, and they give you this concept that, especially the New Testament, that there's this group of people that got together. They had this incredible plan to deceive the world, and they wrote books that went along with other books, and they just put this package together, and they called it the Bible, and then that's what happened, right? And if you don't understand how the Bible came together, then they have a pretty good argument, right? If you think that that's the way that it happened, then you have to ask yourself the question: my faith in God is somehow based on this Bible that I don't really understand, but I'm pretty sure it was put together under suspicious circumstances. And if the Christian faith balances precariously on the edge of ancient declarations of superstitious men, if that is your concept of the Bible, and there's been a lot of arguments out there to say that that's what the Bible is, and you're thinking about walking away, then why not walk away? Right? For the Bible tells me so. And I get it. If your faith in Jesus is based on this book that was compiled by a bunch of men hundreds of years apart, then I understand your suspicion. But the thing is, and this will maybe ruffle some feathers, but my faith is not in a book. My faith is not in the Bible. See, Christianity is fully investigable. You can investigate faith. But the interesting thing that I find is that my faith is not in the Bible. My faith is actually in a person. That person is Jesus of Nazareth, who was raised from the dead. And when we look at how we know about Jesus and the significance of Jesus, now the Bible reveals Jesus, but my faith is not the Bible. My faith is in the one in whom the Bible reveals. And what's interesting is that under the most significant growth period of Christianity, in the first 300 years, this collection of documents that we compile, that we have together called the Bible, didn't even exist. There were documents that were written, but the Bible as a whole didn't exist in the most significant growth period of Christianity. So my question to you is not that do you believe in God, or why do you believe? And if you are investigating this, that shouldn't be necessarily your question. Your question should be something like this: is Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John? You catch that "or," right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, their document that records the life of Jesus, is it a reliable account of actual events? When we're looking into these Gospels, these first 4 books of the New Testament, it's not the fact that they're in the Bible that gives me trust in them. It's the fact that the accounts that they record are reliable, and because their accounts are reliable, that's why they're included in the Bible. So to understand how this was all put together and how these people recorded their events, we need to understand just how this whole process came together. And it starts off with this event, right? Now Jesus was born, it was miraculous virgin birth, but not everybody knew that. Person's, it's a great cover-up story for something gone wrong, right? But the real event of Jesus was not even his teaching. It wasn't about the number of people that had followed his teaching. There were other people in that same period of time who had significant followings, who had great teaching. Those aren't the things that are significant about Jesus. The fact that he was risen from the dead, his resurrection is what marked him. There was this event, and it happened, and people witnessed it and experienced it. And then what happened is there is this incredible movement of people. In the first, when it started, it was called the Way, following the way of Jesus. They weren't even called Christians for a long period of time. They certainly weren't called the church. There's just a bunch of gatherings together of this movement. And what happens in this movement over like a period of 30 years is that people start writing down what this movement is all about. They're just individual documents. And there are lots of people writing this down, writing down different points of what happened during this period of time. right? We have 4 different copies of people writing down about the life of Jesus, and then we have this other book called Acts that talks about the early church, writing down those documents. And then at some point, all of those get assembled into this New Testament book, the Bible. And what's interesting about this is that over the first century AD, in this first century period, there's this event, there's this movement that's taking over the world because of this event, and there are people documenting what's actually going on. And for the people who were documenting what was going on, there's this period of time. So Jesus is raised from the dead, is crucified and raised from the dead at about 33 AD ballpark, right? And then over the next 30, 35, maybe 40 years, before the destruction of the temple in AD 70, all of these documents, this Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, they were all written down in that period of time. About 30, 35, maybe 40 years from that event, these documents are written down, right? So what's kind of interesting, not as significant as being raised from the dead, but like in that 30, 35-year period is similar to when Jen and I started dating and we got married about 32 years ago, right? So it's, if you were to write a Bible about our relationship, right? If different people to write down different perspectives of Jen and my relationship, you would get a few different accounts of different things that happened, right? They'd be individual. If I were to write down what my wedding, the rehearsal party, everything around the wedding looked like, and I were to write down my perspective of what happened, and if Jen were to write down her perspective of what happened, you'd get slightly different accounts of the story, right? The mornings of our weddings were quite different, right? Jen did a lot of planning coming up to the wedding. I didn't do that much. You know, so you're getting different perspectives of an event that happened 35 years ago. And then if you were to, Randy was at my wedding. He was standing up there. I made him rent a tux to do it. And he would have a perspective of what happened about that event, 35 years ago. And all of those accounts would be true, and all of them would just pick up just small little perspectives of that day, right? And so when you think about how this could be recorded, am I going to remember everything from 35 years ago, 32 years ago? Probably not. I can't remember what happened this past week for sure. But if you were to compile all of these accounts and pull them together, you get a pretty accurate perspective of what happened at our wedding day. All right? And that is what is going on when it comes to recording the event of the resurrection, the event of Jesus' teachings, all of the things that happened in Jesus' life. And so you have Matthew and John, who were actually disciples, who were walking with Jesus. They would have perspectives of what to write down and document about their experience with Jesus. And then you have Mark, who is recording what Peter experienced. And then you have the book of Luke, which is a really interesting perspective because Luke, who may have been a follower of Jesus, it doesn't really say, but his experience when he writes the book of Luke is all about compiling all of these different stories from different people and investigating the event of Jesus. He said, I can investigate this, and I can check it out to see what this story is like and what the story of Jesus is. And so when Luke tells the story, or when he documents what he has experienced, and this is apparently Dr. Luke, and Dr. Luke writes the book of Luke, and he also writes the book of Acts. And it's not that those two were separated. He just decided, I need to write down what's been happening over the last 30 years, and I need to investigate. And what we read about Luke is that he traveled with Peter. He traveled with Paul. He knew James, the brother of Jesus. He knew the people who had experienced the very of the day that Jesus was raised. They had experienced Jesus' teachings. They had experienced all of the early stories of this movement. And it's interesting when you look at what he has to say. It's incredible the research that he did. Now, the very first word that Luke includes in his account of Jesus is many. It's a very important word, because if Luke was trying to deceive us all, he would tell us about this secret he had, or this singular account, experience, or encounter that he had. But when Luke starts writing the book of Luke, he starts off with this. He says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. That's not how you start a lie or a conspiracy scene. He says, I'm going to write this down, but don't just rely on my account of this, because many people, there are many other accounts out there. And what I'm doing is I'm just bringing this all together to come up with an accurate, detailed account of the life of Jesus, which is incredible. So here's a question. Well, so it starts off with, many people have written about Jesus. Question for you, how many people will write a detailed account of your life? And the answer is not many, right? So we don't know when Luke writes that many people have done this, is it like 4 or 5? I don't know, but I will tell you this. It's a lot more than the number of people who are going to write a detailed account of my life. Many people have done this. So when Luke is pointing this out about the significance of Jesus, he is pointing out that you can investigate my investigation. There is detailed accounts out there. Not as detailed and not as compiled as what I'm going to bring to you, or at least he's saying, I haven't seen it yet. The other important thing that we need to keep remembering is, as Luke is writing this down, he isn't writing the Bible. Luke is investigating and writing down an account of Jesus. And you got to ask this question, why did Luke and many others bother to bring us detailed account of a Galilean day laborer turned rabbi that was executed by Rome? So the interesting thing, I don't know why I'm saying interesting so much, but it's interesting, is that you have Julius Caesar, who we all know about. There are not as detailed accounts or a detailed account of the life of Julius Caesar as there is of Jesus, this Galilean day laborer who was executed when he was in his 30s. In fact, when you consider all of the most famous people from this period of time, or even earlier, Pluto, Aristotle, there were not the detailed accounts written about those people that there are about Jesus. How many other peasants, executed criminals, are there detailed accounts written about their lives, especially first century? None. Jesus' significance was not his birth. At the time that this is written, the center of power is Rome. Everything's going on in Rome. And off in Palestine, there's this peasant carpenter who becomes a rabbi, who has a following. Like, why waste the ink writing about this person? He's not in a significant area. His job was not that significant. There were a lot more powerful rabbis and Pharisees and teachers of the law during the period of Jesus. The only reason that there is a detailed account by Luke and many others is because something extraordinary had happened. And something really good had happened. See, Luke is not writing the Bible. Luke is writing a report on his investigation into the life of Jesus. And he is doing it in a period of time where he was able to talk to eyewitnesses, to the significant leaders of this movement, to everybody. He even spent time in prison with Paul. So it goes like this. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. So Luke is not writing an account of something that he heard about that had happened 100 years ago. Luke is writing an account of the things that have happened to the people around him and to him. What Luke is writing is current, it's accurate, it's investigated in a time period where he could talk directly to the people who had experienced the events. It had happened among us. Just as they had handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Right? If you were trying to investigate an event, well, you know what? Sometimes I think about my ancestors who came over here. My great-grandfather was orphaned and landed on the Old Hastings Road with an aunt and uncle of his. I would love to know what that was like. Not that I would want to experience it, but I would love to know what it was like. And right now, when I go back, I can go on Ancestry.com. I can find out when he landed here. I can get some little details about the life he experienced it. But at best, I could accumulate, maybe a couple pages about the information of his life because it happened years and years ago. And I think, what would it be like if I could just spend a day with him? How much more information could I get? How much more accurate would it be if I could just ask the questions of him or his aunt and uncle, or if I could just ask the people that experienced it what it was like? And as Luke is writing this account, he isn't writing something about something that happened 100 years ago. He is writing something about something that just happened, and he could talk to the people who experienced it. It happened among us. It happened in our day. And I asked the people to whom it happened what happened. With this in mind, since I myself carefully investigated everything from the beginning, what's interesting also in Luke's book is that he starts with the birth of Jesus. And it doesn't fill up the whole book by any stretch. It's just a short chapter that he goes, Jesus, Mary became pregnant. They had to go to Bethlehem because there was taxation. And when he was in Bethlehem, Jesus was born. They were afraid to go back to Nazareth, so they went to Egypt for a short period of time. It's the kind of information that I could get from Ancestry about my great-grandfather. It's just kind of dates and information, but then the story of Jesus becomes personal because he talks to people who personally experienced Jesus. I got the beginning, I got the groundwork, I got the story at the start. And in the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you. As Luke is writing this down, he's going, okay, I'm starting to see we're moving along. There are several of the people who experienced Jesus firsthand, in person, and a bunch of them are starting to get martyred. Somebody needs to write down this information. And Luke says, I too, in addition to all these other people who have written things, I too want to get this down and I want to get it right. My mom is giving my generation this incredible gift. Over the past year and a bit, she has started to write down her life story. And she has written down kind of all the things that had happened to her, and it's getting to be, several chapters in a book. I love that she's doing that. Because who else am I going to ask? When I could go to the source and I can go, I wonder what it was like when I was born, or when Brian was born. Like, I wonder what those experiences were like. I get to go and I get to read firsthand from somebody who experienced it. And Luke is doing that for us as well. Luke decided that he needed to write down a detailed account while he could ask the questions of the people who experienced it. He wasn't writing the Bible. He wasn't connected to a conspiracy. He is just writing down a detailed account because the details matter, and the people who experience the details are starting to die off. Luke's account of the life of Jesus was written 300 years before the Bible was assembled. Just, when you watch the Da Vinci Code and so on, you can get this idea that there's this big conspiracy plan that they all came together and let's come up with a story and we'll, revolutionize the world. Which doesn't even make sense when you think about the circumstances where Jesus was, this peasant day laborer who becomes a rabbi. Like this, it doesn't make sense. And Luke tells you that that's not what I did. Luke is telling this story as he investigated it in the time of. And he's writing down the accounts. He wasn't writing it to contribute to another larger document. He was simply writing a detailed account, and he was sending it to somebody else so that they could know. We'll carry on with that. Luke's account of the life of Jesus was included in the Bible because Luke's account was considered reliable when it was written. 300 years later, the Bible wasn't even legal until into the 4th century. They didn't compile a document because Christianity was persecuted. It didn't get any sort of government support. It didn't get any sort of national support. It was often blamed on famines and all kinds of other things. And when they finally pulled the Bible together, they didn't look for just a whole variety of information. They looked for the most accurate accounts, the most reliable documents written by the people who had experienced Jesus, or written by the people who investigated the people who had experienced Jesus. When you consider whether the story of Jesus is accurate or not, the question shouldn't be, is the Bible true? It really isn't about that. The question is Luke telling the truth? Is Luke telling the truth, or is Luke lying? And that's as simple as your investigation into Jesus should be. Is Luke reliable, or is Luke just coming up with a story? When we go on with the story, in Luke chapter 1, verse 3, with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account to you, most excellent Theophilus. When this gets included in the story, I go, okay, I get this. Luke has been probably requested by this Roman named Theophilus to give him an accurate account of the life of Jesus and the life of the early church. And we don't even know who Theophilus is. This is the only place that his name shows up. And he may have even paid Luke to come up with this orderly account. Yeah, he said somewhere along the line, Luke's relationship with Theophilus is a personal relationship. Luke wasn't writing this down for generations to come. He was writing this down for the sake of one person. And what's interesting with this is that it was written so that Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. I'm writing this down because I investigated it and it's true. It's not just wives' tales about Jesus. It is absolute truth, and I'm going to tell you the story of Jesus. When we look at what this train of events is, there's this event, this resurrection of Jesus, that sparks a movement. And during the early days of that movement, there are different people writing down exactly what happened, because what was happening was spectacular and extraordinary. And Luke is one of these people who is writing down exactly what happened. And the truth is that that movement didn't die at the end of Luke writing down this story, because that movement is still alive today. That movement was carried on. And before the Bible was compiled, before it was ever compiled, in the late 3rd century, there was an emperor called Diocletian, who was the greatest persecutor of Christians. And there was actually an edict that went out that the Roman world was to annihilate Christians. And so the way that they were trying to attack them is they would execute them, but they would also take their literature, which was something like a book that was written to Theophilus, and at some point Theophilus must have said, I bet other people would like this. Why don't you make a detailed copy of this book? And they started making copies of this letter that was written to Theophilus, and there were not hundreds, but thousands of copies of this book of Luke, which wasn't the book of Luke, it was the letter to Theophilus. And this letter to Theophilus got spread around to all the churches everywhere. Why? Because it was a detailed, accurate account of the life of Jesus and the life of the early church. And 300 years later, as they were trying to annihilate the church, they went in search of all of these letters, that we call the book of Luke or the book of John, the book of Matthew. And they looked for these and they started to burn them wherever they could find them. They wanted to destroy them. And people gave their lives to try and pursue these letters that revealed a detailed account of the life of Jesus. So that you, when you have a question about whether the story of Jesus is accurate, you are able to go and look at a letter written from a 1st century follower of Jesus to somebody who was asking for a detailed account of the life of Jesus. And you can go look at that and you can see it for yourself. It is investigable. And over the next little while, we're going to be looking at the book of Luke and looking at what Luke has to say about the life of Jesus. And as we do this, and maybe kind of back to my introduction, maybe you are questioning Jesus. Maybe you're questioning this whole Christianity thing. And if you are wanting to walk away, if you choose not to follow Jesus because it's inconvenient, then I get that. Following Jesus is not convenient. Following Jesus is going to cost you. And it may cost you money. It will cost you time. It may cost you friendships. There are a lot of things that following Jesus, that makes it inconvenient. And if you're not going to follow Jesus, then that's a reasonable argument. I would argue that following Jesus makes life better for you and makes you better at life. But, this argument can kind of make sense to me from an intellectual perspective. But please don't choose not to follow Jesus because you don't think there's anything to the story of Jesus. What's interesting, over this period of time where they compiled the Bible, they went through all of these, I guess, got to step back. So you have Diocletian, who is annihilating Christians, and then you have Constantine, whose mother apparently was a Christian, and who decided to make Christianity a legal religion. And when it became a legal religion, all of a sudden it had national support, it had the government support. Christians were able to actually meet in public places. Christians were able to talk about and share their documents together. Christians were able to form essentially what we see as a church today. And what they did when they compiled what we have as the Bible is they took thousands of different Christian documents, which would have included, plenty of copies of Luke's letter, plenty of copies of John's letter and Matthew's letter and Mark's letters, and they pulled them together and they worked at getting the most accurate, competent accounts of these, what we now call books. And as they were putting this together, you may have heard that there were other gospels written. But all of those other gospels were written in a significant time period after those who had experienced the events of Jesus had long passed away. In the second and even in the third century, you may have heard about the Gospel of Barnabas. You may have heard about the Gospel of Thomas. And as they were compiling the Bible, they were able to essentially clean up all of these other letters that had been written hundreds of years after the resurrection of Jesus, but were out there and scattered throughout the church. And so what they were able to do is they were able to essentially clean up the documents that had become a little diluted over the couple hundred of years, and they pulled together all of the most accurate documents that were recorded in an accurate time period, and we can fully investigate the life of Jesus not because things are in the Bible. The reason that they're in the Bible is because they were considered accurate, and accurate to a time period. So here's the question. Why do you believe in God? Is it because of a song that you sing in Sunday school or a song you sing at camp? Is it because somebody told you that there is enough support in the Bible to support a belief in Jesus? Or is it because you are satisfied that the story of Jesus, the life of Jesus, the fact that he died and rose again, that he was not only sent by God, but that he was God, and that he has a plan for you, not based on superstition, not based on some documents, but based on the fact that 2,000 years later, we are able to access information that was recorded by the people who experienced the very events of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And it's not about faith in faith. It's about experiencing Jesus in your life, allowing this God who can be investigated, allowing this Jesus who is extremely investigable, and allowing him to move in your life and for you to follow him. Allowing Jesus to lead you. Jen was saying at the start that we know of several people who experience God in nature. And I believe that experience in nature is God telling you, reaching out to you to tell you that there is a Jesus who is investigable, who you can pursue, who you can see, and who is wanting to save you.